what the life is like of Christians elsewhere, because I'm convinced the more I travel that we are in a very, very unique place in history, and we have an opportunity to influence the world in a way that we don't understand. We have the thing that the rest of the world needs, and they actually have the thing we need. They have life under a cross. They have a faith that's lived under suffering and persecution in ways we can't begin to understand. We have the ability to help them. We have, plain and simple, we have money. We don't understand how much money we have. But our money can go so far in some of these places in the world, and I think taking our group to Lithuania showed a bit of that. Russia 10 times more so. Our Christians, brothers and sisters, there are Lutherans in places that you would not believe there are Lutherans. The most remote, tiny villages in the middle of nowhere. I was on the Mongolian border, for instance, and this tiny little village on the Mongolian border has Lutherans in it. And then we're on the border between where Mongolia meets China and Russia. Kind of all three countries come together there. Literally in the middle of nowhere. I mean, a little village in the middle of a desert without a major town within 5 hours. And there's Lutherans there. And these are people living in abject poverty. And in many cases, people living under religious persecution. This part of the world that I was in is filled with Buddhism. Buddhists are not nice people. You know, the typical American image you get of Buddhists is that they're all kind of like the Dalai Lama. They're these peaceful, loving guys that wear robes. That's not a true Buddhist. That's the American version of Buddhism. I was told when we went into some of these places that if the Buddhists knew we were coming, that they would stop the car on the road with guns and make us go away or shoot us. They are violent. They are not peaceful. The American version has them all peaceful, but that's pure propaganda. That is not what a real Buddhist is. These Lutherans are living amidst Buddhists. They're outnumbered, and they suffer. If they hold their head up too high, it gets knocked off. So what I want to talk a little bit about this morning is some of what I saw and some of what I went away with. And I'll warn you right now that one of the things I went away with is I want to help these people. There's particularly one congregation at the end I want to talk about, but I want to help them. The things they have endured, we can help with, and they can teach us in the process. So anyway, I want to go through a little bit about what I saw and what it kind of means. The Russia you see on TV is not Russia, not the real Russia. In fact, there are stories. Every place I went, they all said the same thing, so I'm assuming it's correct, that there is the propaganda Russia, where the cameras follow Putin around. And everywhere he goes, they literally have an advanced team going ahead of him. And if he's going to a town, this advanced team will completely change the facade of the town. They'll put paper over the houses to make them look new. They'll pave the streets. They tell stories of literally painting the grass so it looks green in these places. Wherever Putin goes and the cameras go, everything looks like it's brand new. That's the Russia they want us to see. In fact, there is not a road that goes between Russia and China. But Putin wanted to show the advancement of Russia, so he wanted to drive from Russia to China. So they built him a road, and they paved it. And the cameras followed him driving from Russia to China and back. Look how advanced Russia is now. As soon as he left, they actually chewed up the pavement on that road with machines and used it elsewhere, so that now that road doesn't exist anymore. I mean, this is the lengths and the expense that they will go to maintain this facade that Russia is advanced and modern and everything. It is not. Russia is a third world country. and everything they touch is garbage. The building construction, if Stan was over there, he'd have had a heart attack. In major airports, in Novosibirsk Airport, which is one of you see it right there, Novosibirsk. This is where the seminary is, where I lectured for a few days. There's Moscow. We were right over here. But yeah, Moscow, Novosibirsk. In Novosibirsk, which is like one of the second or third biggest cities in Russia, they were building on the airport there. The stone block that they were laying down looked just like the stone block in Lithuania Church in Palanga. There were gaps like that in the grout. The bricks aren't put up there nice and neat like we do, where we kind of stack them one on top of another and center them and everything. They just kind of throw them up there haphazardly in any order possible. And you could see through the walls. The brickwork was so bad. The concrete, where they had poured new concrete, looked like they just poured it, and it left it hardened as it poured. There was ridges, there was lumps, there was mounds. You could see the gravel in it. It was laughable. A high school kid could have done a better job than that. They took me to a train museum in Novosibirsk to look at the Russian trains, because the train thing is such a big deal there. I spent 24 hours in the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which only goes, fortunately, only like 40 to 50 miles an hour. It's not a high-speed train. But at any rate, they take me to the train museum, show off their prized trains. The welding, holding those things together, I could do. I've never had a welding class in my life. It was high school level welding. It was embarrassing. There is no pride in workmanship. There is no craftsmanship. It is all a facade. So there's the Russia you see. Where I traveled again, Moscow to Novosibirsk. We flew from Novosibirsk to Irkutsk. Took a train down here, right to the Mongolian border. Met with a congregation. I followed the bishop of the Siberian Lutheran Church around. Every 4 times a year, once a quarter, he makes a round from his home in Novosibirsk to all the other little Lutheran congregations around in this area and back again. It's 4,000 miles, or I think it was 7 hours. So I think it was 4,000 miles from Chita to Novosibirsk. So he makes roughly a 10,000-mile journey 4 times a year just to see these people. And they will have a pastor visit them maybe once a month. They're that remote. And they're little tiny congregations. 20 people in this town, 10 in that town. Anyway, we went down here along the Mongolian border. When we got to this little town here where we got off the train, we were told, don't talk. We don't want them to know you're American. When the cab driver came, we sat for an hour in dead silence in the back of the cab driving to the next town, because if the cab driver wouldn't have mugged us, he would have gone back and told his friends about us, and they would have hunted us down. You fear for your life there, not just as a Christian, but as an American. And absolutely, they said constantly, don't let anybody see you have American dollars. Stealing, there's a different morality. Stealing and lying is normal. I mean, it's culturally accepted. It's not seen as the bad thing that we do. We assume our morality on the rest of the world. It's not that way. When we went to the train museum in Novosibirsk, the 2 people who took us said, you stand over here, we're going to go up there and talk to them, to the ticket counter. Okay, fine. Find out they were lying to the ticket counter and telling them we were Russians because it's cheaper to get in if you're a Russian and you pay more if you're not. So they're over there telling them we're Russians, lying. They come back and say, sorry, we can't get you in at the Russian price because of you. And he pointed at me. They see you're obviously not Russian. So she just walked up to the counter, lied through her teeth, got caught in it, came back. We said, we didn't want you to lie in the first place. Just pay the price. Then she goes back and pays it as nothing happened. If I just lied through my teeth to somebody and they caught me in it, I wouldn't go back up there and pretend everything was fine. But that's normal Russian culture. And we're walking through the train museum. There's a big sign on the side of the train, do not climb on exhibits. And our host pulled us aside and said, your first rule of Russian culture, when you see a sign, you do exactly the opposite of what it says. And they forced us to get up on there and take a picture right by the sign that says, don't climb on the exhibit. I mean, that's, the Russian morality is something very different. So we took a train then to Irkutsk. No, we took a flight from here, a train down to here, a taxi right down to the border. We drove in one of the members' husband's cars from the border up to this Ulan-Ude, which, by the way, has the largest head of Lenin in the world, so pretty exciting. 4.5-hour car ride, and the car didn't make it. It broke down halfway. We had to hitchhike in the middle of Siberia. Then took the train from Ulan-Ude over to Chita, and then spent 3 days there, and then flew back. That's 15 time zones from right there. And while we were there, then we visited various congregations and made shut-in calls to various people. This is the Russia you see, and it looks very progressive. This is Moscow from the air, and the houses look progressive. They look like American houses, yards. That's new. It's progressive. There's a city there. It's very modern-y looking, and the Sochi, of course, you saw at the Olympics, looks very modern-y and everything. And there's more cities. The big cities always. The inside of the city looks extremely modern and progressive. And they have road systems. By the way, they're road systems. If you look real closely, one thing you will notice on these roads, there are no lines on those roads. There are no lines on any roads in Russia. We got in the car. This was a 2-lane road with 4 lanes of traffic on it. And everybody looks for a hole and drives as fast as they can for it. There's no lines on these roads. There's no storm sewers under them, so they fill up with water. It's dirty, filthy, it's a mess. You can see signs of some Americanization, Burger King, and that literally, if you translate the Russian, literally says Burger King. It's not like they use Russian words, they just use the Russian letters for the American sounds. This was in Novosibirsk. We saw Burger King, we saw Papa John's, very modern, very progressive. And everywhere you go, in every town we were in, no matter how small, there was a statue of Lenin. That is the idol of Russia. Every single town has a statue of Lenin. This was the statue down in that little tiny village along the Mongolian border. And he's pointing towards Mongolia as if they're his friends. But it is an idol. It is their god. There's another statue of Lenin in another town. Every single town will have a red square and a statue of Lenin. There's the statue of Lenin in Novosibirsk. Very commanding, bigger than life, strong. Russia's all about strength. They want to project an image of strength. And Putin, too. You see all the photo ops of Putin, bare-chested on a horse, doing judo, all these manly, strong things. That's the Russian psyche. He is enacting what the people expect a Russian to be. So you see all these statues of Lenin that are very formidable and strong. There's the largest head of Lenin in the world. It's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records. That's in Ulan-Ude. It's a tiny little town. Well, not tiny little town. That's probably a couple 100,000, but it's surrounded by tiny little towns. But our host was fond of saying that the head is empty. It's just an outside shell of a head. And he said when they were building it, was tempted to run behind it and say, "This is Lenin. My head is empty." But he didn't. Probably would have got shot if he did. Irkutsk. I mentioned this in the sermon Wednesday. It's Wednesday night. This is the city. And it's a big city, and it's an ancient city, where right there was a Lutheran church. In 1917, there was a civil war in Russia between a white army and the Red Army. The Red Army won. The Red Army was the communists. The White Army were against communism, and the Lutherans, by and large, sided with the White Army, fought against the communists. And because of that, when communism won, Lutherans became targets. And in the city of Irkutsk, they had a big, beautiful, cathedral-like Lutheran church. And they had a lot of members. After the Red Army won, they bulldozed the church. But the Christians wouldn't quit coming there to worship, the Lutherans. So they took the altar stones and the stones from the church, and they used it for the foundation of this thing. This is all altar stones and stones from the church, the Lutheran church. And they dropped a statue of Lenin right on top of it as a statement that Lenin has triumphed over this, over the myth of God. Well, the Lutherans wouldn't stop being Lutherans, and they would come here and they would worship where their altar was and just ignore the fact that Lenin was standing on it now. And the congregation kept coming back, and eventually the Soviets, the communists, just showed up with buses. They arrested them. They hauled everybody, the entire congregation, off to the Gulag, and nobody lived. They hunted down every member of that congregation. So that a couple of decades after this, a Lutheran pastor came back into Irkutsk looking for Lutherans because he knew there was a Lutheran congregation there. And he asked the people all around where this church had been, went door to door asking for names of Lutherans so he could make contact with the Lutherans. Nobody could remember any names of Lutherans anymore. They were that thorough rounding up the congregation. I mean, they took the congregation roster like we have, went down through every name and arrested everybody. And none of them survived. They killed all of them. That's communism. So this statue of Lenin still stands over the altar of the old Lutheran church. This is why Lutheranism is also so small in these towns. Lutheranism was huge throughout Russia. But because they sided against the Red Army, they were hunted down systematically and eradicated. So it takes a tremendous amount of bravery to be a Lutheran over there. And they still have this in their memory. This was their grandparents this happened to. And the Soviets, of course, were anti-God. They hated Lutherans. So the amount of suffering these people have to endure to be faithful and to be Lutherans it's so humbling. Everywhere you look to throughout Russia, you see Russian Orthodox churches. This is in Novosibirsk. That's Novosibirsk. That's Novosibirsk. That's a little town along the Mongolian border. They have this golden domes on these Russian Orthodox churches. That's in, that was in Chita. That's in Chita. Russian Orthodox churches everywhere. I come to find out some stuff about that. All of these Russian Orthodox churches are funded largely by the mob. Russian mafia is huge, very dangerous, very prevalent. The corruption throughout Russia is mind-blowing. Putin, did you know, was a billionaire. He's a billionaire. He got his billions, according to the Russians that talked to me, since he was a KGB agent, he had all this information on people. He essentially blackmailed them for money, amassed his billions, and then used his power to do little things like steal an oil company. They're crooks. And a lot of the crime builds Russian Orthodox churches and pays for Russian Orthodox priests. I talked to a guy who was Russian Special Forces at one point in time. Sniper. He was converted to Lutheranism while doing a 3-year stint in jail. After the war, he came back. He was with a group of friends. One of them stole a car, so they all got arrested and thrown in jail. Long story short, he converted to Lutheranism, came out of jail, and because he was a criminal, well, actually, even while in jail, there was a prison guard who was especially nasty to Christians. So nobody would claim to be a Christian in jail. He was one of the only ones who wasn't afraid to say he was. And because of it, because he stood up under the persecution of this one guard, he said the rest of the guards gave him a great deal of privilege in jail. And when he got out then, he had a reputation for being a strong character. So the local crime syndicate contacted him. And he said he went to the local crime boss and told him to his face, "You are going to hell for this." And the crime boss threatened to kill him and have him beat up and everything. And he told the crime boss, "Go ahead, do what you will." The crime boss said, "What my crimes don't mean anything because I can help pay for a cathedral. I can buy a priest a new flat, and God is going to let me into heaven." And this guy told him that's not going to work that way. You're going to go to hell. And after he was threatened with getting beat up, he said, "I'm not going to change what I said to you because it's the truth, so do what you think you need to do." And he said, much to his surprise, the crime boss said, "Well, it's obvious you're actually a man of God, and you can't be intimidated." And he said they gave him a whole bunch of money and sent him away. There's a lot of religious superstition over there, and the crime syndicates try and buy their way into heaven by building all of these gorgeous Orthodox churches and pay for priests. And they are empty of Christianity. You see Christianity in the art. I mean, it's a holy space, but in terms of a priesthood, nothing. This guy I talked to went to the Russian Orthodox Church after he got out of prison. Well, no, before he went into prison, I guess. Because in the military, he had heard about Christianity. He tried reading a Bible. It didn't make any sense. He went to the Russian Orthodox Church looking for baptism and instruction. They gave him a bottle of holy water, said, "Here, drink this and go away." That's the kind of pastoral care he got. So when he ran into Lutherans that actually cared about his soul and wanted to teach him, he just drank it up. This guy has brought his wife, his mother-in-law, his grandparents, his parents. The day I was there visiting the church, he had his mother baptized. It was very moving. The guy's like 6'4". He was special forces, he's built. He's sitting there with his mother, and when it's time for her to be baptized, he takes her by the hand and leads her up to the font. And then stood there with her. Very touching. Everywhere you go, you see these images of strength and power. And the Lutherans are living in this, but this is the real Russia. Those are the roads we drove on. They rattle a car to pieces. Almost every vehicle I was in had cracked windshields. And you see this emptiness of everything. Desolation, desert, and the roads that, these actually have lines on them. Roads that are just horrible. This is a village off in the distance. And again, this is just some of the scenery, what Siberia was like, southern Siberia. The further east you go, the more desert it becomes. The trees disappear and it just becomes desolation. This is typical now of the villages along the way. Almost, in fact, not almost. Every single village we came across looks something like this. Once you get out of the city and outside the propaganda zone, you see the real Russia. They're all log cabins. They're squared up logs, but they're all log cabins. And there's garbage and there's junk laying everywhere. Everything is a wood structure. There's electricity coming to these villages. There's no plumbing. There's no plumbing. They all have to cart in water from somewhere. They either have wells or they take it from a river. It's right now in this part of Russia, which is eastern Russia, eastern Siberia, some of the villages we visited, 50% of the population was infected with tuberculosis. 50%. We were told that some of these places we stayed were well known for having hordes of bed bugs you couldn't get rid of. The hotel we stayed in, we were near the Mongolian border, had one toilet for the whole hotel, and that didn't have a seat on it. No shower. Went 3 days without a shower because there is no showers. They don't have plumbing in these places. They have electricity coming in, and they have cell phones. They have cell phone towers everywhere in all these little hills around these villages, and all the villagers have cell phones. But they don't have plumbing. And they have cell phones. It's just bizarre. Most of the stone structures were built during the Soviet era, and they're all falling apart, and nobody tries to rebuild them. There are these hulks of cement buildings sitting everywhere. And then all around it are these little wood buildings without any plumbing. And just the juxtaposition between the propaganda of Russia and the real Russia. Here's the picture in this town of this happy family on this jogging path and this Caucasian-looking, rich Russian family. There's the real Russia. Over here, this was a mound of horse manure. And the sign evidently says something about keep Russia clean. So the juxtaposition between the Russia they want to project and the Russia that actually exists, dogs running everywhere in these villages. We got off the train, and 5 dogs met us coming off. They're looking for food. Every village, dogs running everywhere, cows running down the middle of the street. Like I say, electricity, no plumbing in any of them. There too, here's another angle of a typical Russian village. They all look like this. This isn't just the worst. Everything is wood heated. And they have these wooden fences everywhere too. I think because at one point in time under the Soviets, they were given like some chickens and a pig or two to take care of. Yeah, that's a goat. So some of them have animals, some of them don't anymore. There's an outhouse there. There. And garbage everywhere. There's no sense, there's no respect for themselves. It's garbage everywhere. And another view. Another view. That thing in the back is a cell phone tower. That's their cell phone tower. So here you've got this brand new, modern-y looking cell phone tower in front of that. And you do get these little weird hints of modernness in it. This is a greenhouse. Guy has a greenhouse, but he still has got an outhouse, too, right next to it. One of the places we visited, of course, that seriously affects your bathing ability when you don't have any running water. One of the places we visited, there was a sauna the guy had built. And, a bar of soap and a bunch of birch branches. And I guess they beat themselves to get off whatever they need to get off and soap up. But that's how they keep themselves clean then, in lieu of no showers. And again, you see the garbage all over everywhere. That was pretty much typical. Moving further east, evidently, the trees have disappeared. Now it's just kind of more desert. Little towns just literally in the middle of nowhere. No income. I was told most of these people are living on income that in U.S. funds amounts to $15 to $20 a month. That's the real Russia. That's a house. There's a family living in that house. Around here, it would be an abandoned shack. There, it's a house. There's the dogs. Everywhere, the dogs. There's the dogs that met us coming off the train. Everywhere, dogs. In fact, we were told that in all likelihood, some of the meat we had in the soup was very possibly dog. There's a dude that was waiting at the train station just to watch what was coming in. Mongolian. This was shot out the window of one of the houses where we stopped to have a service. This particular house, there's about 20 Lutherans in this community. They meet in somebody's house. And this particular village is built over uranium mines. The average life expectancy in that village is in their 40s. They all die of radiation poisoning. They aren't relocated. They're just peasants in the middle of nowhere, and who cares what happens to them? And while we were there, they served us tea and pork lard. That's another thing Russians do, I come to find out. Pork lard. Strips about that thick of lard with some hide on the top of it, maybe a little piece of meat down on the bottom of it. And they eat this stuff during the winter because of the protein value. And they serve it to us when we're there, and it's not cooked. And they told us going in, too, that there's a rather large trichinosis problem right now. I don't know what I ate. I don't know what I caught. But I know that tea came out of their well, and their well is irradiated with uranium. And, so you're put in these positions where these people want to serve you their best, and they give you the best they have when you go and visit them. They love their church. They love their pastors who come to visit them, and you eat whatever they put in front of you with a smile on your face, because it's their best. But this is what I mean with what we're living in. We don't understand how we've got it. Poverty level in the U.S. would be considered absolutely rich in any of these communities I went to. 15 to 20 bucks a month they're living on. What they need, and every one of these little villages doesn't need a church unto itself. But there's a mother church in Chita, this one main town. It's about a 5-hour drive to this town from Chita. But they're renting out space right now in a Catholic school, I think. And they're running out of space. They're growing very quickly. The Lutherans there are going into these people who are getting nothing from the Russian Orthodox churches. And they're witnessing of Christ to these people, and they are growing. And they're bringing their family in, their friends in, and they're out of space in this church. That's the church that ministers to these villages. And what I want to do someday is help them build a church, so they actually have a church in this Chita, because that's the main hub that all these other villages are going to be serviced by. And they don't have any way of paying for that. This is, again, you'll see these old Soviet-era buildings in the middle of these run-down, ramshackle villages. And some of them are occupied like this one, which is a hotel. Some of them aren't. But anything concrete-like is left over from the Soviet era. This is the non-Soviet. This is the real Russia. This is the backyard of a home. That's the bishop on the left and Pastor Johnson on the right. This is one of the homes we visited for a shut-in call. A couple in their 80s. That's their sauna they made. That's the lady, Maria. They've lived in this shack for 50 years. That's the inside of it. It is a one-room, maybe 12 by 12 shack that is so low a ceiling you have to duck. 50 years they've lived in this place. That's a stove off to the left. They made it themselves out of clay. They do all the heating for their shack, and they do all their cooking on it. That's her giving us a bowl of soup. There's no running water. That soup had to be taken from a well someplace, the water, and there's no purity laws there. That's some of the pork lard fat stuff in the middle of the table they feed you. And again, you smile and you eat it. That's the outside of her home, waving goodbye. That's just like street numbers. They all have little numbers on them. But that's the typical Russia. That's the genuine Russia. That's outside a major city. That's the inside of his sauna. That's outside the major city of Chita, which is like 300,000 people. And it looks very progressive when you're in the city, but when you hit the outskirts, that's where the real people live. That's eastern Siberia, and a town, again, in the middle of nowhere. It's desert. That was one of the groups we met with. I think there was 6 or 7 people total that showed up that day. These are the people living in the irradiated town. Their houses are very clean. I mean, they're simple, they're small, they're shacks. They have to heat with these stoves they build, but they're clean. And as typical kind of Chinese Oriental culture, you take your shoes off when you walk in the front door. So they do keep them clean to the best of their ability. But they're going to all die young because of the radiation. This is a young girl that was there. She had a cell phone. That's outside their front door. They don't bale hay. All the hay you see everywhere for their animals is mounded up like this. And that's their heating supply for the winter. This little church was on the outskirts of town. It's held up. The door is held shut by this 2x4. They just recently added the siding around it to preserve it from falling in. It's an old Orthodox church. And you look at it on the outside, thinking, what a shack. And then you step inside the thing, and that's the inside of it. One thing the Russian Orthodox do know is they have a sense of art. But it turns out that all this art was done by prisoners. This is carved by prisoners in jail. Some of the other stuff, too. There was no priest serving it. Carved, doesn't show up very well in here, but icons everywhere. That is made by bread in one of the jails. One of the prisoners made this crucifix out of bread. That was carved by another prisoner. So the prisoners kind of come there, and that's their devotion. This is one of the congregations that we met with, and the bishop brought communion to them. This is in the main church in Chita, Pastor Johnson helping serve communion. This was the lady who was baptized. You see, they're very liturgical. The charismatic movement is actually very large in Russia. Speaking in tongues, kind of the non-liturgical stuff. But the Siberian Lutherans are very liturgical, which fits well with the culture because the Russian Orthodox Church is very liturgical. So for people to go from Russian Orthodoxy to Lutheranism, they at least don't have to abandon the liturgy. They just are learning a new theology. Yeah, and then back to Siberia. This little church in Chita, this is Chita. That's the one where they don't have a building. They're renting from the Catholics. The Catholics want to sell them a piece of property, but they can't begin. It's, I think, 18 million rubles, which translates into about 500,000 US. And then they have to build a church besides that. So the amount of funds they need is unreachable for them. But it's not unreachable for us in the U.S. And eventually I told that congregation to come up with an actual rock-hard plan on paper, and I'll see if I can help them in the States, not just here, but around, to find funding. Because they are growing like crazy. They've gone from like 60 members last year to 75 this year. The people, when you talk to them, so cherish their faith because they've lived in this culture that's been anti-faith. The church, the version of church they've been brought up with, the Orthodox Church, doesn't care about souls. And in Lutheranism, they find a teaching that actually cares about their soul. And they are telling everybody they can think of about it. Anybody got any questions or anything? Russian Orthodoxy, the Orthodox and Roman Catholics are similar in some aspects. They worship saints. They've got a very hierarchical kind of church government. The Orthodox are Christian, if you find a priest that actually knows and cares. They believe in Christ, but they also have a view of salvation very different than ours. We understand Jesus as existing for the purpose of taking sins away, of forgiveness as his primary function. The Orthodox see Christ's primary function as something called theosis, that it's Jesus' job to make us more godlike. So it's a very mystical kind of religion that tries to make the individual more godlike. Godlike in your thoughts, godlike in your actions, eventually to where you're perfected in heaven in your true godlike form. And that's the whole basis of their religion, and it becomes very mystical. They don't exactly tell you how to go about being made godlike. They focus on sacraments. They focus on liturgy as a way of communicating with God and becoming more godlike. But in terms of forgiveness and redemption and atonement, these are not central ideas to the Orthodox like they are for us. So the Lutherans in that context can come along and tell people, no, this is what Jesus really came to do. And there's no forgiveness in Orthodoxy. So Lutherans can proclaim forgiveness to people that are hearing it for the first time. It's an amazing opportunity. Any other questions?
Surprising to me that in this area where everything is built of wood
That's a good question. I assume it got trucked in or hauled in by wagons from somewhere. We did see a lot of cars in the Trans-Siberian Railroad hauling logs. And we saw a lot of lumber mills in the cities. But yeah, they sure didn't get it from right where they were living. Everything is birch, too. Birch and pine. That's pretty much all they had over there for lumber. And birch rots real quick. It's not a very sturdy wood. Any other questions? Some of the outlying villages we were in, about all they can do is they raise their animals and try and sell the meat. And while we were there, in fact, our driver was making a deal with one of them for some meat to buy from them to give him some money. But you're buying meat that's irradiated. You just ignore little things like that. Yeah, there's a tremendous opportunity there for us to help these people and to help Lutheranism grow by supporting this main church in Chita. But what they give us, I think, is more. They teach us what it's like to live contented with nothing. The one lady that in the house we went to along the Mongolian border, the woman was in a wheelchair, and it didn't have any tires on it. It was just rims. She's going around her house on rims, and I don't know that it ever had tires on it. She probably bought it when it was just rims. I mean, they're living with very little. They eat potatoes. Their main diet is potatoes and beets. Beets were everywhere in Russia. Every place we went to, they had something with beets in it. So beets and potatoes, whatever grows in rugged, unfertile ground. A lot of wheat fields. We saw wheat. But the level of poverty that they live in is mind-boggling. Yeah. He doesn't travel it every time the main bishop does, but he's been to these places several times before. Yeah. Anything else? They are. That's one difference between Russia now and Russia under the Soviets. Under the Soviets, they couldn't have. But the current Russian government will allow churches to own their own property, to build churches. Yes. So it's a safer environment than it was under the Soviets. But none of them have churches anymore because the Soviets destroyed them all. All right, why don't we close there then? Merciful Father, we pray that you bless and help the people in Russia, that you likewise use their example of faith as a testimony to the love and the strength of your grace that persists in every environment. Strengthen us, we pray, that we might bear our crosses in this world and open up our hearts that we might help those in need everywhere. For Jesus' sake, amen.